Welcome to the first random battle. What, you thought we were going to go on a Final Fantasy adventure and not encounter enemies? Please. Well, here we are in the month of Odin. We made it a really long time without a battle, but this is going to be our first in a new line of series about the iconic enemies of the Final Fantasy franchise. I'm going to try and distill the Final Fantasy enemies for you and kind of leave out the run-of-the-mill goblins, orcs, and all that kind of stuff. They don't need to apply here. We're going to look at the Final Fantasy staples. So as normal with these, I'm usually overambitious, and I wanted to talk about 3 of the enemies, but whenever I got through this, it was just too much. So we're just going to look at 2, and then obviously we're going to do more of these. So the 2 that we're going to look at today, Cactuar and the Tonberry. I could not think of 2 more iconic Final Fantasy enemies to open with than these 2. We're going to talk about them briefly, talk about what they are, how they look, where they come from, what makes them unique, who created them, if possible. And yeah, let's just jump right into Cactuars. Well, actually, you don't want to jump into Cactuars. That's really bad. So Cactuars, pretty simple concept. They're little humanoid saguaro cactus people. If you don't know what saguaro cactus are, they're the cartoonish cacti that you see, you know, in Looney Tunes or whatever. And I guess if you want to get geographic here, they are in the Southwest desert in the United States. Anyway, they're little humanoid saguaro cactus people, and they do have very angular arms and legs, usually at like a 90-degree angle if you want to get mathematical. And they have 3 little needles that stick up from their hair. And they have a constant surprised face depicted with 2 black holes for eyes and a sort of elongated hole for their mouths. And, you know, hey, it's not a coincidence that we're talking about such a creature because their official debut was made in Final Fantasy VI. Alright, so we kind of know what they look like a little bit. So what do? Well, more often than not, they're pretty fast. They're extremely fast, in fact. Especially in Final Fantasy X, which I'm replaying right now, they run away all the time. But if you do get one, and they do tend to stick around, they're going to have a signature attack known as 1000 Needles, dealing 1000 damage, of course. And some of the more exceptional Cactuars, maybe in the later games, they can be called Gigantars or Jumbo Cactuars. You'll run into different varieties of them. They have a variant attack called 10,000 Needles, and honestly, that is the attack that I personally remember. These stupid 10,000 Needles will basically kill you if you're playing a game that only has 9,999 HP, but otherwise, if it goes above that, they're going to do 10,000 damage, and it's awful. So the Cactuar itself has appeared as a summon in a few games, actually, specifically Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VI. He appears as a little Esper Magicite, and most notably, at least whenever I think of Cactuars, especially the summons, I think of Final Fantasy VIII. Personally, most of my memories come from Final Fantasy VIII, except, again, fighting them in stupid Final Fantasy X. And the summons are basically their attacks. They're going to do 1,000 needles or 10,000 needles, whatever it happens to be. So let's go back to our more, run-of-the-mill Cactuars. Like I said, they're extremely fast. I've said that about 4 times now, and I cannot overstate that enough. They are very fast. But if you do manage to beat them, most games are going to allow you a rather nice chunk of experience and some loot to go along with that. If you have a blue mage in your game, or if you have a game that has blue mage-ish skills, we're talking Kamari, Quistis, anything that you can learn skills from, you're going to be able to more than likely learn that 1000 needle attack. And if you just, don't want to deal with that, go out, kill them, get the XP. They're going to be weak to water, usually, if that's an element that appears in whatever particular game that you're playing. Otherwise, it might vary. It could be Blizzard. Yeah. So from what I could find rummaging around the internet, the Cactuar was designed by Nomura, citing that he drew a similar kind of doodle in high school. I've also seen references of this pointing them to a clay burial figure known as Haniwa, Haniwa, which are actually kind of disturbing to look at, honestly. I can possibly see the connection with the desert influence and the clay and everything. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but if you want to do more digging, there you go. Cactuar is a completely iconic enemy, but let's go ahead and move on to the next iconic character. Probably one of the most in the entire franchise as a whole, just an iconic Final Fantasy being, and that is the Tonberry. These little guys are just about as iconic as chocobos or red mages. So what do they look like? Well, they're little green creatures, usually covered in a matte brown cloak, often carrying some kind of old-fashioned lantern and a large butcher knife, usually of some sort. Maybe sometimes just a really kind of ornate knife. Pretty large though in comparison to themselves. They're pretty small enemies. The Tonberry himself first appeared in Final Fantasy V. He's become a major icon ever since. More often than not, he's sometimes like a chibi, cute kind of character. You can find plush toys of him everywhere, but their in-game counterpart could not be farther from the truth, at least farther from their innocent nature, I guess I should say. So a battle with this Tonberry usually happens like this. I'll describe this battle. This Tonberry appears and he's just so incredibly cute. He's like one of the cutest things that you could possibly see in a Final Fantasy game. You know, he's got a little knife there and everything. You start attacking him, you're dealing thousands and thousands of points of damage, and he's taking it all full force. Yeah, as you're doing this though, he kind of takes a step, 1 step, 2 steps closer to you. Keep on attacking with him. You've done, what, 30,000 points of damage or something right now. His little yellow eyes that are just unblinking, he just keeps moving forward very slowly. You keep attacking more and more. You've done so many more thousands of points of damage, and he's right in front of you. And what does he do? Doink. And then you feel the full force of this incredibly, iconically cute character. You're either going to do one of two things. You're going to die instantly, or you're going to take massive, massive amounts of damage. Much like the Cactaur, if you can overcome this, you're going to get a pretty sizable amount of XP or ability points or whatever the point system of the game that you're playing in. It's a pretty good reward, but let me tell you, they are difficult to defeat. So, similar to our little Cactaur buddies, they do appear as summons, specifically in Final Fantasy VIII. After you beat a bunch of Tonberries, I remember beating about 20 to 25 of them. My research tells me that the number can vary. Either way, it's a ton, it's a lot, and it takes a long time to do this. But as you go and do it, at least in Final Fantasy VIII, you're going to be eventually fighting what is known as the Tonberry King. He's a pretty big one. And assuming you're triumphant, you will get the Tonberry as a summon, and it does what a Tonberry does. Kills mercilessly while looking incredibly cute. Tonberries are one of the most notable creatures to come out of Final Fantasy, period. We talk about them here in this random battle episode, but they have far, far more interesting information about them. They've appeared as foes, obviously. They've appeared as friends. They've appeared as citizens of ancient nations, they've appeared as magical guards, master evil tacticians, major antagonists, and pretty much any other possible thing that you could think of. They have many, many spin-offs, such as the Dingleberry, maybe not the best name, Meteor Master Pug, there's the Tonberry King, which I talked about, we have the Master Tonberry, there's a bunch more too. So their lineage throughout this Final Fantasy series is impressive to say the least. These little guys have some of the most expansive lore of any creature that you can look at. I couldn't possibly hope to cover it all here. I could probably do 15 months on Tonberry, but I'm not. But I could. So I'm going to give credit where it's due, and the Tonberry is absolutely one of the most iconic things that Final Fantasy has ever doinked us with. If you're going to play a Final Fantasy game from 5 or beyond, you're going to run into these guys. Be wary. Next time on A Year of Final Fantasy, in the month of Odin, we're going to be talking about a game known as Final Fantasy Airborne Brigade, a game that I ran across that many of you, myself included, probably have no clue about. So I went, did some research, we'll try and take a look at it next time and see what that's all about. If you like what I do here, please feel free to hit the like button, share it around, do all the social media stuff. I appreciate any help I can possibly get. It's just mostly me, a one-man army, running my little corner of YouTube. I appreciate all that you guys have done for me so far, and as always, until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.